the Organic Science Cluster program is led by the Organic Federation of Canada as the industry applicant, and we work together with the Federation to develop this program on behalf of the researchers and in collaboration with the researchers across the country. So the Organic Science Cluster program is, we're on our second cluster, and it is a national program that's funded by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada through their Agri-Innovation program. And it's a 5-year research program that we pretty much set all of the research priorities and the projects at the beginning of the 5 years, and then it allows continuity for the projects to continue over that time frame. The total value of the Science Cluster 2 program is $10.5 million or thereabouts. There's a cost-sharing ratio that's involved, so about 75% of the funding comes from the federal government, and about 25% comes from industry. And so therefore, we're looking at industry contribution of over $2 million towards this science program. So all told, this is the Science Cluster makes up one of the largest federal government contributions to organic agriculture in the country. And so we want to make sure that we gratefully acknowledge that contribution. And the Science Cluster program is, if you go to our website that hosts the Science Cluster, it's dal.ca/OACC, and if you click on the Clusters tab, or Science Clusters tab, you'll see all the information about the Science Clusters and the latest results from all of the different projects. This cluster has 37 different research activities or different research projects happening right across the country. It involves university scientists as well as Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada scientists. And many of the projects are happening right on farms. The projects are funded by industry partners that may range from individual farmers to large businesses or commodity groups. And all of that information is available on our website. We also just recently presented a magazine that provides, or produced a magazine that provides an overview, a brief snapshot of each of the research activities, and I believe that link was included when the announcement went out regarding these sessions. So with that, we have two sessions that will be held today and on, I think, April 11th, if I remember correctly. And today we have 3 presenters, and most of them are quite well known, or I think they're all very well known already in the prairies. And so I won't spend too much time with introductions. Rather, I'll allow more time for questions. Our next speaker is Dr. Jennifer Mitchell-Fetch with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in Brandon. And those who know Jennifer know that she's an organic oat breeder, and she's going to be talking about some of the new cultivars for the grain producers in the prairies. Also, Jennifer, I wasn't sure if I heard you sign on, so...
I'm here.
You're there, great.
Yes.
So fire away, you have 15 minutes.
Okay, if everybody can go to the first slide, I hope everyone got the presentation. And I called it Breeding Success because we did develop 2 organically produced cultivars. But now the question I have is, will the producers in the industry want to look at them and grow them? So if you go to the next slide, the main focus of our organic breeding program is to produce cultivars that producers in Western Canada will want to grow, and that the millers, the processors, the food and the feed consumers, and everyone else will want to use them, and that they'll be really pleased with these cultivars and how they perform. So if you go to the next slide, breeding a cultivar takes a long time, and this schematic of the breeding program and cultivar registration shows all of the steps that are required to produce a cultivar that can be produced in Canada and is specifically grown in Western Canada. First of all, you have to decide which parents you want to use to make the cross. You probably want to bring together characteristics from at least one parent that performs well in the Western environment, and perhaps you want to bring something else in from the other parent, perhaps a disease resistance or a quality trait that will improve the one parent. You make the cross and you get your F1 generation or the filial generation, and that's the babies or the progeny of the cross. And the next few generations are involved in selfing or stabilizing those traits, inbreeding, and making some selections along the line to throw away the bad stuff. And that's what a plant breeder does a lot of, is throwing away things that don't meet what we think we need. So you go from the F2 to the F5 generation, and normally with the organic program, this takes that many years. So there's no real shortcuts that can be taken during that period of time. And I normally subject my early generation breeding lines to the environment that they're going to be grown in. So these were grown as bulk plots under organic management, normally at the University of Manitoba organic sites. And we would go in and hopefully get a little bit of disease in these plots, and we would select the very largest, plumpest kernels to plant the next generation. So my thought in that was that we were getting seedlings that were really vigorous and would grow well, germinate well, get an early stand, and maybe outcompete some of the weeds that we would be encountering in that environment. By the time you get to the F6 generation, we assume that most of our basic traits have been established. We would take single panicles from each of those plots. There'd be about 150 panicles per plot, and those would go to New Zealand just for an increase. And they'd be exposed a little bit to some of the similar diseases down there, like crown rust, stem rust, and barley yellow dwarf virus. But we'd bring back most of the lines if they looked good in New Zealand for their disease resistance, and then they would come back and go into a preliminary yield trial. And these yield trials would be under organic and conventional management, just because we didn't have a lot of locations where we could do an organic test. We'd select 20 to 23 lines out of that preliminary yield trial to go into our B organic test. And thankfully, the organic science cluster provided funding that I could have contracts with some associations in Western Canada that had access to organic land and could evaluate these lines in a replicated trial at about 7 locations across Western Canada under organic management. Now when you go to the other side of the slide, we get into the variety registration system, where I'm limited because I have to line through the Western variety registration system, but that's all run under conventional management. So we diverge a bit from the organic management to get the line registered, but we tried to continue putting the line back into the B test so that it would be evaluated under the organic management as well. Now, when we get into the commercial or pedigreed seed production system, that's where we ran into some issues with the first cultivar that we developed through the first organic science cluster, because there was no options for organic commercial seed production. But the licensors of the first cultivar were able to find a couple of producers that would grow these cultivars on organic land. And so AAC or Avena, which I'll talk about next, was produced totally under organic management for the commercial seed production system. So if you want to go to the next slide, the variety registration system in Western Canada ensures that anything that is being registered for production has merit. It's got to have something better than what's out there. It's got to have either improved yield, improved disease resistance or better end-use quality. So if you go to the next slide, and this is some of the targets that I have to meet with my cultivars that come out of my program. And the agronomy evaluation team with the Prairie Recommending Committee on Oat and Barley, who decides which lines get supported for registration, is part of the, there's the agronomy evaluation team, the quality evaluation team, and the disease evaluation team, and we have to get support from all three of those teams in order to have a cultivar supported for registration. So with the agronomy team, we usually have to have lines that are equal to or better than our checks. And the conventional checks are AC Morgan. At the time that these lines went through, we had AC Leggett, which is our disease check, and we also have CDC Dancer, which is what our quality check. So we have to be better than all of those. So if you go to the next slide, you can see what the quality evaluation team wants to see before they'll support something for registration. We have to have things like better than 50% 12 growths. We have to have 1,000 kernel weight that's over 30 grams per 1,000 kernels. We have to have beta-glucan that's around 4.5%, and our oil content has, at that time, had to be lower than 7.5%. And those are traits that are necessary to meet the heart health claim that's in the U.S. and Canada for oats, to be receive that heart claim that you've seen on some of the lines, or some of the boxes of cereal, some of the boxes of rolled oats, that kind of thing. Go to the next slide. This is what the disease evaluation team says we have to have at minimum. We have to have an intermediate resistant to smut, moderately susceptible to barley yellow dwarf virus, and intermediate resistance to those other diseases like stem rust, crown rust, and now Fusarium head blight will become a disease that we have to look at starting in 2019. So the next slide talks about AAC or Avena, which was the first organically developed oat cultivar in Western Canada. And it spent its whole life under organic management and was officially registered in 2014. Now, Grain Millers has licensed it, and they were the spearheaders for getting this line put through the pedigreed seed production system under organic management. So it's, I think, there might be commercially available certified seed this spring, but I'm not sure with the dry year we had in Saskatchewan last year, there may not be as much seed available as originally we'd hoped. So the next slide, Oravina had good yield under both conventional and organic management, so that was good. It has good lodging resistance. It's got a high test weight and 1,000 kernel weight. And for the millers, it had high total dietary fiber and beta-glucan. They were a bit concerned because it had a little bit higher oil content, but it was resistant to most of the diseases and had the required intermediate resistance to stem rust. So the next slide, our newest one that came out of the Organic Science Cluster number 2 was tested as OT 8006. And it's been named AAC Congsor. And I know that's an unusual name, but the gentleman it's named after was one of the founders of Grain Millers, and he was one of the driving forces that pushed Grain Millers into the organic side of the business. And he unfortunately died a couple of months ago. But this cultivar was registered in 2018, and his son was presented with the documentation, and he said his father would have been very, very pleased to have this cultivar named after him. So that's kind of a nice story. When you see Congsor out in the commercial production, you know the story. So the next slide, this line also had good yield and good lodging resistance. It again had a high test weight and high 1,000 kernel weight. And I think the high 1,000 kernel weights are coming because we were selecting the biggest seed back in the early generations. So I think that's where we're gaining that high 1,000 kernel weight from. It's got high percent plumps with good protein and good beta-glucan. Not quite as high as what AAFC or Avena has, but it's still at or above the acceptable level. And Congsor is resistant to smuts. Unfortunately, it's only intermediate to crown rust, and this is because the gene we put into this line for crown rust resistance has recently been overcome. Well, not overcome, but there's more races of rust in the environment that will attack that particular gene for resistance. So Congsor might do well in the areas where crown rust is not as big a problem as it would be maybe in Manitoba. And now our next step is we hope that the producers are going to take notice of these new cultivars, and the next slide, and that they're going to grow these cultivars on their organic acreage. And if you go to the next slide, we hope that the millers are going to want to use these cultivars in their finished products and adding value to these cultivars as they move through the organic food chain. And the next slide is that the consumers will want to produce our products, and they'll keep buying the organic oat products that come from these cultivars. And I just wanted to prove that our breeding group is capable of breeding, because we've had actually now 4 babies in the last couple of years from our project. So that's the group that supports me and does all of the actual work. And if you go to the next slide, I'd like to say thank you to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and the Growing Forward 2 funding and the Organic Science Cluster, and especially grain millers in Cliff Bar, my industry partners, the Organic OACC, OFC, the POGI group, and the Prairie Oak Growers Association, who support my conventional program, and Martin Entz and Dean Spanner, and there's so many others that I'd like to say thank you to for supporting me through this project. So if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Definitely a prolific program in more ways than one. So yes, well, we have time for a few questions. Open the lines.
Good morning, Dr. Mitchell-Fetch. Stuart McMillan calling here, and as a producer who will be growing some registered Oravina this year for commercial production, I too am hoping that producers will be interested in following years of it. Mm-hmm. My question related back to the agronomy selection traits. When you are having to follow for the registration agronomy traits that may not necessarily be a fit for organic production, such as reduction in stature and height, how do you balance your selection choices for traits that may not be necessarily the same under a conventional program that you want in an organic program, like high leaf area index or early emergence or rapid soil coverage, which aren't necessarily agronomic traits they're being assessed on?
That's a good question, and that's something why I try to test the lines that are going forward for registration under organic management at the same time they're going through the variety registration program, in hopes that we'll keep some of those positive organic traits in place. And when we look at registration of the cultivar, I also present the organic produced data, so that I can, when I present the cultivar to the Prairie Recommending Committee on Oat and Barley, I can say this line does perform well under organic management because it's got these other traits, and you should still support it because it's a good cultivar for that specific use. And we haven't had too much trouble in the last 2 cultivars getting them approved by the PERCOB committee. So I do want to keep all of the good organic traits in the cultivars as they're going through the registration system.
Great. Is there another question?
Jennifer, it's Laura Rant here with Organic Biz, but I just wanted to get a sense from you. Do we know at this point that these cultivars grown and produced under organic conditions, are they going to be better performers for farmers compared to perhaps conventional cultivars that are just grown under organic conditions? I mean, have we been able to establish that?
There's been some research done, especially in Europe, and Dean Spanner had a doctoral student who looked at this, and they found that selecting cultivars under organic management did result in better performance under organic systems. So we believe that these cultivars being selected under the environment that they're going to be produced in is our best option, that they're likely going to have better traits for those specific environmental conditions.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and it sounds logical. I just wondered if you've been able to quantify that yet through the research.
Yeah, just what they've done in Europe and Dean's student, they did show that there was better performance. So
good. Okay, thank you.
Is there another question?
It's Will Odie speaking. I had a question, well, part of the comment, I guess, in relationship to the last question. There was some work done at the University of Manitoba with regards to wheat breeding, and it was found to be favored the organic production by 10% over organic grown, conventionally bred wheat varieties. So that's pretty significant as far as the farmer is concerned. The actual question was, I'm curious, when in the industry are we going to see the more highly produced, higher valued wheat under the same regime as Jennifer is doing in Manitoba?
I could speak to that, I guess. The organic wheat breeding program that was started at the same time as my organic oat program was discontinued with the second organic science cluster because the industry didn't push. So if organic producers in the organic milling and baking industry want organically developed cultivars, I think they'll have to start pushing the government to return to that direction.
And Jennifer, it's Andy here. I can comment further on that. Within the Science Cluster Program, you've nailed it. It costs a lot of money to sustain a long-term breeding program such as this, and so there needs to be a clear from the industry that there's a need and a demand for this work. The farmers, and this kind of comes back to the end of your presentation, Jennifer, it's so important that the farmers start taking up these organic oat varieties or cultivars because we need to demonstrate that they are of value, that this breeding program is of value. If the cultivars are not taken up, then it encourages the government from funding programs like this. So we definitely need to have that support, and we need to support the researchers who are doing the work and encourage them and work with them, and that all comes together to get more funding and maintain a long-term program like this. Okay, so we have about 10 to 15 minutes that we can offer for general comments, discussion, or questions, and so if Jennifer and Miriam, are you still both on the line?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So we'll open it up to questions or discussion on all three present.
Will Odie here. Going back to the discussion about oats versus wheat breeding under an organic regime, I think, there certainly was an advantage in the oat scenario to have grain millers as a corporate entity pushed behind this and obviously registering the crop or licensing it. And of course, the thing is that the problem that exists at the milling end is whether a crop produces better or has better yields doesn't really affect the millers at all, as long as they're getting the product they want. So really it's up to the farmers to push forward and make their voices known that, in fact, they want organic regime breeding trials for wheat as well. And I think that, as I mentioned, that research that came out of the University of Manitoba, 10% is a pretty striking difference. What was interesting, I think, if my reading of that research was correct, was that actually the yields on the organically researched crops were actually better under conventional regimes after the crop got to that point, as well as under organic.
That's true. AAC tradition does yield very well across environments. And that was the cultivar that was developed organically.
It's Martin Entz here. I just wanted to, support what Will said. We actually published that work was Ann Quirk's master's, and it was published in 2012. And it showed significant. It showed that 10% yield increase and higher protein and larger, plumper kernels. So that breeding under organic really did make a difference, and that was a very good study because it was the same population selected under both systems. But in terms of the other partner that we need is a willing plant breeder, and it just so happened that when that work was finished, the Ag Canada plant breeder left for another job, and so we lost that breeding leader. And I just want to, shout out to the Ag Canada colleagues who we've heard from today, that, their dedication to doing something in organic has been really critical, because when you get somebody who's a wheat breeder in Western Canada, applying for funds from industry for organic wheat breeding, they're not going to have trouble getting the funds. We just really need that leadership, and so we've been working with the wheat breeders in Ag Canada, but we're hoping that we have an enthusiastic one come forward. So those are my thoughts.
Very well put, Martin. It's exactly the issue that we have right now. And we need the farmers to be approaching and talking with the wheat breeders and bringing them into the fold. So by the time we get to our next science cluster program in 5 years, that they are primed and ready to go. Further questions for the speakers?
Yeah, Scott Beaton calling from West Winnipeg. I just had a quick one for Dr. Mitchell-Fetch. The availability of those oat cultivars that you've been working on, how does it look for the next few years?
I believe AAC or Avena will be, there will be some seed available this spring. OT 8006 or AAC Consor will just start into the pedigreed system this spring, so it will be 2 or 3 years before there's any certified seed available.
Okay, and it's available through whom, or did Stuart buy it all up for this year?
Stuart didn't get it all. It's Scott here with Grain Millers. I was just going to make the comment that we tasked Fedoric Seeds at CAMSAC with doing the multiplication and basically handling the seed sales for us. We're not an input company or don't want to pretend to be one, so we hired some real good professionals to do that. I'll give you their number for any of the producers that are on that want to inquire further about it. They're 306-542-4235. I believe there still is seed available. I'm not sure on the amount or cost or anything like that, but Mike or Rod at Fedoric Seeds can help you with that.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Will Odie speaking. I did make an inquiry back in February, and they weren't quite organized at that point. They didn't have any clean, but the price was going to be, I think, around $11.50 a bushel from Fedoric's.
Oh, and I guess one other note on the seed thing. So with buying the seed, you are not required, even though we have the license on it, you aren't required to sell it, your grain back to grain millers. It is an open variety for you to grow and market how you please. But we would love you to sell it back to us, of course.
Any other questions from the group?
Yeah, I think there's a real vote of thanks should be given to grain millers for pushing this forward. It's it may be the first of many varieties over the years, but it's a great start. So thank you to grain millers.
And I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge all of the industry partners that were contributing to these particular research projects. So it's Grain Millers and Cliff Bar and Prairie Outgrowers Association, and then Western Grains Research Foundation on Miriam's project, and then on Steve's we had Sask Pulse, as well as Western Grains Research Foundation. So it's really important that we stay connected, especially to these. It's really nice to see the commodity groups contributing to organic research as well. And so I think if we can get more organic growers sitting on boards of some of these commodity groups and showing that there's a real market and some integrity in the organic side, that builds further industry support also. So thank you very much. Any other questions before we close down? I do have one for Jennifer that's I've always kind of been wondering, I guess, is to what extent, like, genomics is not genetic engineering. Genomics is looking at the genome of the oats in this case and mapping it and understanding what genes are turned on or off or suppressed and so on. And do you use genomics when you're doing your breeding program for oats?
I do use the genomics, or at least a subsection of it called molecular marker assisted breeding in the conventional program, and we've just started using it more regularly in the last couple of years because we've finally gotten some markers available or identified that are really useful in my program, and I'm starting to get very excited about the possibilities of where we can go with using marker-assisted breeding and marker-assisted back crossing, which is another tactic that we use. And I'm hoping with the next Growing Forward or Organic Science Cluster number 3 that we will be able to incorporate molecular markers into the organic program as well. And I think there's a lot of things that we can't identify just by looking at the lines in the field, but perhaps with molecular markers we can identify those traits and make sure we keep them in the program and have them in the finished cultivars. So I'm getting excited about this part of the program.
Great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. I'm excited to hear that. I do get questions whenever I get into breeding discussions with anyone from locally or around the world. They do come back and ask if marker-assisted breeding is being used in Canada for organic breeding programs. So very good. Any other last questions?